Greetings everyone, Tenet here. We are living in an era where the MMORPG genre feels incredibly stagnant. Every year, new titles release promising to be the next big thing, only to burn out or bury themselves in predatory monetization. Yet, 14 years after its initial release, Guild Wars 2 is not just surviving, but thriving and proving itself to me, again and again, to be the best MMORPG on the market. I wanted to make this video with that specific end in mind, to show you why I find myself coming back to the world of Tyria again and again, and why, in my opinion, it stands out against its competitors for just the right reasons. So let's jump into our talk with the 10 main points that make this MMORPG completely unique amongst its rivals. First, horizontal progression, or respecting the player's time. This is arguably the most critical architectural triumph of this game, its fundamental respect for the player's time. The standard procedure for the MMORPG industry is built upon a foundation of planned obsolescence. Developers, they rely on vertical progression, a systemic treadmill where every new expansion artificially raises the level cap or introduces a new tier of items, rendering your previously acquired gear mathematically irrelevant. Your effort into acquiring that new meta stuff is only worth it until the next expansion. You're investing your time and your money, in the case of subscription-based games, into an experience. The experience of progressing through that expansion's gear. When a new season releases, however, that experience is closed. You had your fun, but that legendary is no longer relevant, except for maybe being a memento of the fun times you had. This is quite visible, for instance, in the artifact weapons of WoW Legion. They played a central role in the development of the expansion and held this almost world-ending power. But once the next expansion came out, the first boar you killed could drop a rusted sword better than your artifact weapon. Guild Wars 2 operates on a completely different paradigm, known as horizontal progression. The absolute ceiling for statistical power in this game is found in Ascended equipment. If you acquired a piece of Ascended armor upon its release in 2013, that exact same item remains mathematically best in slot today, in 2026. The statistical cap has not moved a single inch in over a decade. You can fully gear a character in Ascended gear in 1 to 3 months, depending on your commitment. Also, Ascended offers just 5% more stats than exotic gear, which is buyable at the trading post for pennies. And that's it. Second point is long-term voluntary objectives. Because why keep playing the game, you may ask, if there's no treadmill? Because you want to, because the game is fun, the content is engaging, because you made friends, not because you need to in order to stay on par with others. There is no FOMO, or fear of missing out. Now you may wonder what then about long-term objectives? They exist in the form of legendary items. Legendary items are a kind of account-wide gear that gives the exact same power as Ascended ones. What legendary items offer is flexibility. You can change legendary gear stats on the go. You can play DPS and healer, for instance, in the same character and using the same gear, just changing the stats in seconds. This makes it so you don't have to grind for a new Ascended set each time you're gearing a different spec. But since its stats are on par with Ascended, you're not grinding for power, you're grinding for flexibility and of course for fashion, since most legendary offer unique visual effects. They modify the appearance of skills, they are basically awesome. Legendaries are hard to get, they take months or even years to get. So you do have something to look forward in the long term, but you grind for it because you want to. Because you dream about having a meteorological scepter, not because otherwise you'll be behind others in the power treadmill. This system completely removes the friction between gaming and real-life responsibilities. You invest your time once, and the game permanently respects that investment. It is an infrastructure designed for genuine longevity rather than forced retention. Consider the practical implications of this. I had a character fully geared for endgame, but I had to take a 2-year hiatus from the game in order to finish my PhD. In a traditional MMO, returning after 2 years means your character has been relegated to irrelevance. Here, the day I returned, I was doing raids with my old guild. Well, more like being carried by my guild, but not because of gear, rather because I had to remember the mechanics, my rotation, and awake my fingers' muscle memory, which takes me to my next point. Three, the combat mechanical depth. Most traditional MMORPGs, they operate on a tab target paradigm, right? It's a numerical stat check where your execution is artificially bottlenecked by a global cooldown. Guild Wars 2 discards that model in favor of a fluid action economy. Your effectiveness here is dictated not by your passive stats, but by active low-level mechanical execution. Since there is no global cooldown tying your hands, the action economy is restricted by each specific skill casting time and the speed at which you can physically input commands and manage animation priorities. Endgame content itself is very rarely a DPS check, but rather focused on mechanics. Cooperation is essential, and some mechanics require each person to do their part or the whole squad wipes. Knowing the fight is infinitely more important than your DPS or your gear. Okay? You can fully clear a challenge mode raid in exotic gear, which you can buy for pennies at the trading post, as I said, if you correctly execute and respond to mechanics. On the other hand, you can be fully kitted in super mega legendary ultra instinct gear and you will die in the first 10 seconds for not stunning a mob you shoot. It is a system that demands analytical awareness, precise timing. It's not rare for me to spend over 1 hour at the golem just practicing my rotation in order to get better at it. So frankly, once you get used to having this degree of mechanical agency of your character, returning to the passive target combat of standard MMOs feels like moving underwater. My fourth point, weapon skills. Your skills, they are not exclusively defined by your class, but also by the weapon you are using at the moment. So you don't have the huge 30 plus icons of a standard mage like in WoW, which I enjoy, to be honest, but your weapon skills bar has only 5 skills. 3 for your main hand, 2 for your offhand. However, you can have 2 weapon sets equipped and swap between them on demand with a short CD, of course. It is the combination of class and weapon that gives your character its unique mechanics. And believe me when I say that for this combat system, 10 skills will surely seem like a lot for you. So it gives your character flexibility. You can be a ranged Deadeye with a sniper rifle that changes to a double dagger menace when cornered in close range. You can have a set you use for damage and other for utilities like stuns and slows. Knowing when to weapon swap is actually a big part of mastering your character's rotation and mechanical advantage. Five, elite specializations or character flexibility. This point connects to both the mechanical depth I mentioned and the horizontal progression. Elite specs are like subclasses you can specialize into once you reach level 80. However, instead of just outright increasing your power, which would make them mandatory, what they do is to subvert how a class plays. They horizontally add new roles you can play. For example, the core elementalist class is a traditional squishy spellcaster built upon wielding the elements to deploy AoE spells with a staff. It has long cast times, big flashy spells, all you can ask from a standard MMO mage. The Weaver specialization, however, my main, completely shatters that mode. It can wield swords to dive into melee combat and attune to different elements at the same time, fusing them together into new skills, turning it into an ultra-high APM melee range battle mage that weaves dual attunements simultaneously. It is widely known as a piano class, and it is extremely satisfying to pull off. I may or may not have died to mechanics just because I was tunneled vision into my skills bar to try to correctly execute my rotation. It's the other elementalist spec, the Tempest, instead of dual attuning, doubles down on single element attuning and gains the power to overload elements, deploying powerful area effects. The Catalyst, another spec, shatters your expectations even more by giving a two-handed hammer to a mage and focuses on deploying elemental spheres with special effects, aiding allies, and crippling enemies. Finally, the latest elementalist class, which I haven't even touched yet, it's the Evoker, who can summon elemental animals to aid it in combat, like elemental spirits, like familiars, okay? This is all in one character. And all these elite specs, with the exception of Weaver, who is always a pure DPS, they can be DPS, buff providers or healers, depending on how you gear them. ArenaNet also regularly releases new elite specs in new expansions, but the thing is, they are not superior to the elite specs that came before them. They only offer different roles. So my main elite spec is Weaver, which was released in Heart of Thorns, the first expansion launched in 2015. It's still a competitive spec for DPS. If you don't buy the latest expansion, you are not weaker than those who did. You simply are missing on the fun of playing that different character, and that's fair. Because if you do decide to pay, you are paying because you want to, not because you need to. Sixth point, the philosophy of cooperative design. Many people talk about Guild Wars community as one of the friendliest, but we must also acknowledge that this environment is fostered by the game's philosophy itself. It's not accidental, it's part of ArenaNet's vision for the game. In a traditional MMORPG, the presence of another player is a source of friction. If someone approaches your objective, they are a competition. They might kill-steal your target or harvest a resource node before you can reach it. The game engine itself breeds an adversarial environment. Guild Wars 2, on the other hand, engineers a completely different paradigm. The underlying code is designed to eliminate player friction. So, resource nodes, they are instanced per individual, and loot drops are entirely separate. So if you participate in an event or strike an enemy even once, you receive full credit. The system incentivizes altruism by rewarding you with experience points, for instance, for things like simply reviving a downed stranger. So horizontal progression also feeds a friendly community, because there is no competition except in PvP, but we don't talk about Bruno, I mean about PvP. It is a daily experience to be failing at a specific open world content, and then someone who is just passing by decides to stop and help you. Why? Because they are not in a rush to the next objective in a race against others, they are playing because they want to. Because of these structural decisions, the game enforces a profound psychological shift. The sight of another player is always a relief and never a hindrance. It is cooperative design in its purest, most practical forms. There are entire guilds with thousands of members whose central purpose is to teach new players end game content, like raids and fractals. This kind of guild hosts raid trainings several days a week and have instructors willing to patiently explain and practice a boss mechanics to players. Equalized PvP and well-built world views versus world. Competitive modes that actually respect your skill and your time. Guild Wars 2 splits its competitive landscape into two distinct ecosystems, structured PvP and world versus world, and they serve different purposes. In PvP, the playing field is perfectly equalized. You can take a level 10 character right off the tutorial and have access to the same exact stats, amulets, runes and traits as a veteran player. There's no gear treadmill. Wins are determined purely by skill. Then you have world versus world, which is like guild versus guild in other games. This is a massive, continuous, three-way server war across sprawling maps. Unlike PvP, world versus world lets you bring gear and builds into the fray. But remember, if you buy exotic gear for pennies from the trading post, there will only be a 5% stat difference between you and someone fully kitted in legendaries. Or if you have ascended gear, which as I said is reasonably achievable, you are statistically on par with someone who plays the game for 10 years. It depends on your skill, because that does not mean you will play the game as well as a 10-year player. Okay? It's a mode built on strategic objective control, where micro-group camp flipping meets macro-zerg warfare governed by tight squad compositions, boom layering, and coordination. So whether you want this pure, isolated skill test or a massive strategic war simulator, the game delivers both modes, and in both modes, what defines success or failure is your skill, not your gear. 8th, the meta event spectacle. Most MMOs, they rely on static quest hubs, so you have an NPC standing with an exclamation mark over their heads. Guild Wars 2 operates on massive map-wide timers and dynamic events. So there are entire maps that function as a single cohesive battlefield. You have smaller objectives in this battlefield, and groups will tackle each of them. The environment of the map and of this war then changes based on players' success or failure. Camps are taken, supply lines are built, and colossal bosses, they literally alter the geometry of the map. So the smaller objectives, they define the future bigger objectives, and groups must plan, cooperate, and react accordingly. It is the closest an MMO has ever gotten to a living, breathing world. Nine. Old zones are still relevant. Old zones never actually die. If you've played other MMOs, you know the drill. A new expansion drops, the level cap goes up, and the previous continents immediately turn into ghost towns. In Guild Wars 2, that simply doesn't happen. Thanks to the dynamic downscaling system and horizontal progression, your max level character is scaled down to match the max level of the zone you're in. But more importantly, the game's economic loop funnels veteran players back into legacy maps. The content remains relevant, especially because each legendary item is linked to a specific expansion, and to grind toward that legendary you need to complete objectives, achievements, and collections in the maps of that specific expansion. There are relevant objectives there for people playing now, and you always find people doing content. Whether you are grinding eternal ice shards in older living world maps to fund your legendary trinkets, running the silver wastes for raw gold per hour, or hunting achievements, there is always a high-end incentive to return. And because of the game's mega server architecture, the population is constantly dynamically condensed. No matter which map you teleport to, from a 10-year-old starter zone to the latest expansion, you will always find someone there, and even maybe a commander tie gap, a squad forming, and a world that actually feels alive. Then, the mount system. This approach to problem solving extends directly into how the game handles traversal. In the vast majority of MMOs, a mount is fundamentally nothing more than a global speed multiplier attached to a cosmetic skin. Okay? So it is a passive numerical buff that allows you to move from point A to point B marginally faster. Guild Wars 2 rebuilds that concept from the ground up. The mounts here possess actual physics, momentum, and more importantly, They are designed with distinct, non-overlapping mechanical purposes, and the expansion in which they were released contain maps which are tailored toward them. The first mount released, which you can get at level 10, is the Raptor. The Raptor has very good horizontal speed and is unmatched in leaping over canyons, gashes and general horizontal obstacles. If you want to climb vertical objectives, you use the Springer, a bunny mount which has very little horizontal speed but can jump very high, achieving vertical traversal in seconds. If you have to move through water, you have the Skimmer, a manta ray-like mount that has increased speed on water, can avoid ground-based hazards and even submerge underwater. Then you have the Jackal, which besides having reasonable horizontal speed as well, possesses unique abilities like a teleport which evades enemies' attacks and gives you short time invulnerability. The Jackal can also traverse horizontally in the air and is also able to teleport through sand portals. The Roller Beetle. The Roller Beetle is a mount which behaves almost like a car. It has an absurdly high horizontal speed, but requires a relatively flat terrain. It operates on an inertia-based physics engine and is able to drift around corners. You have a mount that behaves like a drifting car. How cool is that? The Griffon is the king of horizontal speed in the air and requires skill to be used effectively. It can't hover like the Sky Scale, but is able to dive and use a boost during the dive to achieve insane speeds. Now, there are in-game racetracks for each of those mounts, and players compete to see who can complete the course in the shortest time. There are entire guilds dedicated exclusively to practice with specific mounts, like the Griffon Academy, and to teach people to use those mounts effectively. So no matter if a mount was released in an expansion 10 years ago, it remains relevant today and will be the optimal choice for you now, depending on your current objective. You're not pressing a button to run faster, you are actively engaging with the topography of the map. It transforms the act of navigation, which is historically the most tedious aspect of any game, into a deeply satisfying mechanical puzzle. Every mount has a specific utility, and this renders traversal as an active layer of gameplay rather than passive commute. Beautiful visuals for maps and animations is our point 11. Timeless art direction. A lot of MMOs, they chase hyper-realism, pushing engine limits until their graphics will be looking dated just 5 years later. Tenet chose a completely different path. They built Guild Wars 2 around a signature paintbrush aesthetic. The environments, the UI and the vistas, they literally look like high fantasy concept art brought to life. Although the game is not realistic as, say, BDO, it still managed to impress you sometimes with the beauty of characters, environments and battles. But the beauty of this game isn't just in the skyboxes, it's in the mechanical clarity of its animations. The character models, they carry an incredible amount of physical weight. When a boss wins up an attack or when you cast a massive spell, the animation is grounded, is deliberate. If you record content or push high-end challenge modes, you know how crucial visual readability is. Combat in Guild Wars 2 is not just a cluster of blinding, meaningless particle effects. Every boon, every condition, and every strike has a distinct color palette and a telegraphed motion. You can actually read the battlefield. This marriage of handcrafted environments and fluid, reactive animations creates a world that balances striking visual fidelity with the performance stability you need for a truly cinematic experience. And 12, and my last point, the adult gamer's haven. No subscription, no FOMO, no pay to win. Let's start with the reality of my demographic. I have my main job at the federal court. I am a scholar with a recently finished PhD. I write peer-reviewed articles, books. I am also a husband with an 80-year-old daughter and another child on the way with a 33-week pregnant wife. And finally, I have other hobbies besides gaming. I am a gardener. I raise crops, teas and spices on a 5-bed garden in my lawn. I exercise, or try to. The traditional MMO model, which demands your commitment as basically a second job, is completely hostile to that lifestyle. In Guild Wars 2, I can simply log in whenever I have the time for that, and whether it be doing World v World, PvP or achievement hunting, whatever I decide to do now in the game, I will be progressing towards some long-term objective, no matter how little time I have for that specific gaming session. I can be working from home and then take a 10-minute interval to kill a world boss, which I know will be spawning in that time for the daily reward, and then I come back to my work with no FOMO. I can set a 3-hour gaming session once a week to do raids with my guilds, and there won't be a neckbeard guild leader living in his mom's basement shouting at me. Instead, I have supportive guildies, and if I can't make it during a specific week, no one will be mad for that. So everyone plays because they want to, not because they feel they need. So these 12 points are, in my opinion, what makes me always come back to Guild Wars 2. If you're like me, you have a fond experience with MMOs, they were part of your childhood, maybe of your teenage years, but you had a different lifestyle then. And nowadays, when I try to play MMOs, be it World of Warcraft or Black Desert Online, I just find myself not being able to keep up with the time investment they require from you. And Guild Wars 2 is the perfect place for me exactly because of that reason. I can play because I want to, I can have fun because I want to, and I don't feel like I have a second job. So try this RPG out, and if you are already a Guild Wars 2 player, leave your comment supporting the game below, and also let's all get ready for Guild Wars 3, which was recently announced, and it's even one more reason for you to play Guild Wars 2 and get used to this model of gaming, readying yourself for the next big thing. Tenet here, and I wish you all a very good, fun gaming session.